I'm Cap. Let's start this off with a refresher for those who don't remember, and a link for those who just plain don't know. If this is the first video you came to, I'm inclined to tell you that it's actually the second one I've made on this topic, don't judge me. There's a link on the screen right now, and in the notification thing on the top, and in the description. Click on that, and it'll take you right to the first one. Now, if you're still here, that means you've watched the original video, so you already know. But let's do a recap Q&A anyway.
So, what are we doing here?
We're looking at how long each character from the main trios of the hit series Kingdom Hearts are present on screen.
Okay, why though? That seems like a really specific subject to focus on.
Because Kairi's been ignored for the entire series, I'm mad about it, and I'd like some numbers to put to that feeling.
I can follow your logic, but entire video still seems like a bit much for something like that. How'd you even measure it?
It's actually pretty simple. Timer starts when we see or hear the character, and it stops when they either leave the scene or the scene comes to an end. We record those times in a now hilariously large Excel file, add them together, and wham! Screentimes.
Okay, what'd you find? What did you find?
Oh, well if you want to recap that, there's once again a link on the screen, in the description, and up top.
I am impatient and lazy and want you to summarize your findings in under 1 minute.
You're kidding, right?
I am literally the most serious I have ever been in my entire life.
Dude, it took me more than 20 minutes to go over that before. And now you're trying to make me do it in one? Less than one. No. I'm not gonna do that. Go watch the video. Fine. Okay. In overall screen time, Sora topped by a country mile. Big surprise, followed by Riku, Aqua, Roxas, Ventus, Axel, Terra, Kairi, Naminé, and Shio. For most screen time in a single game, Sora crushes it there too, followed by Aqua, Ventus, Terra, Riku, Roxas, Axel, Shio, Naminé, and Kairi. To figure out why who got what time, we proposed 4 different concepts. First, there was the split between the active versus passive characters. An active character does stuff, a passive character has stuff happen to them. Because we have more consistent new stuff to check on with an active character, they usually get more screen time. Next, we have the player character effect. When you're playing as a given character, they're gonna get more screen time since you're experiencing that story through them. Third is the point of view effect. A point of view character is going to get more screen time since you're experiencing that story through them. Those might sound like the same thing, but they're not. It's like a square rectangle thing. Most PCs are POVs, but not all POVs are PCs. Fourth, we had point of introduction. The earlier characters introduced, the more opportunities they have for screen time. Note, this is a much weaker factor. Later characters do beat out earlier ones, and characters introduced in the same game can vary wildly in screen time. Finally, Kairi got shafted. Bad, and I'm still mad about it. Time. You know, it only occurred to me now that I didn't have to actually record that all in one go. I could have just said the lines and edited them together. Now let me be clear. That was not a comprehensive summary. If you want the full story, click the link and go watch the video. Please. I worked very hard on it. Now, after nearly a year, a master's degree, and a wedding, I'm back to finish what I started. Or at least do more of it. Specifically, we're talking about filling in the void that was the Disney trio. Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and George G. G. Goof, Dippy Dog, Goofus D. Dog, Goofy. But before we get to that, I've got a few clarifications and corrections that I want to make because I'm thorough. First is adjusting some numbers. Some of the videos that I used from Gamer's Little Playground had sections missing. At the time of the first video, I knew about these and filled in the gaps for the character measurements. But I forgot to add them for the full cutscene time. As a result, everyone's percentages were a little inflated because they weren't being taken from the actual full times. We've got the original numbers shown on screen to the left, and the refined ones to the right. Second, I don't think I did a good enough job clarifying that cutscene time is not the only way to measure a character's significance in the plot. This one might not really be interesting or important to everybody, but it is important to me, and I'm the one making the video. Using screen time is a way of converting something that's very subjective into an objective form. Psychology and other empirical sciences do this a lot. It's called operationalizing. It is by no means a perfect measure, and I would actually argue it's not even the best measure. But if I wanted to go with something that might be more highly theoretically connected, then it leads to a lot more operationalizing, which means more variation, and I want consistency specifically. Suffice to say, these videos are much better looked at as reference material, more than anything actually definitive. Finally, no one's actually asked me this, but I'm gonna cover it now anyway. I don't plan on doing Union Cross, for several reasons. First off, I didn't care. Up until very recently, I knew next to nothing about it. But after about a 2.5-hour conversation with a friend of mine who played up to around mission 930-something, I have the general gist. I know about the data world, Lorem and Elrena's existence, and yes, the fact that Ventus is there. That alone forced me to at least consider it. So I looked back through Birth by Sleep and Kingdom Hearts 3, and Ven's involvement never really comes up. At least, not in a way that I picked up on. In 3, Ven doesn't get to react to Deus Ex Machina, doesn't hear about Lee and Isa's mysterious girl, never sees Aqua's red claws, never knows about Sora's conversation with Chirruthy and Strelitzia. He doesn't even really see Marluxia or Lurksine except for the face-off moment. The only thing we get is this scene at the very, very, very end of the game, and it's not even clear if he knows who this is.
Stop!
There were some more people I didn't recognize. Oh, and I saw these weird animal creatures. It's like I've been part of some big adventure.
Go!
In fact, I actually didn't know that any of that stuff I just listed was important to Ven at all. Ven in Union Cross and Ven in Kingdom Hearts might as well be different characters. However, from a scientific standpoint, those reasons suck. The next ones don't. Union Cross is entirely player-paced word bubbles. Now, I addressed those in the first video.
To further clarify the measurement's parameters, scenes where speech bubbles are used instead of voice acting were kept in. While these scenes are normally paced by the player, the time spent on them was judged to be reasonable and not considerably longer than you would normally expect for a playthrough.
The thing I didn't mention there was that the word bubble scenes make up about 4-ish hours total of the entire time, which made them very easy to account for. Best case scenario, Union Cross would double that. Worst case, well, when you look up cutscene compilations, there's inevitably going to be some variation in length. Different uploaders edit in different ways. Some might omit scenes that I don't think are needed, or they'll accidentally repeat or forget scenes. That's fine as long as it doesn't get out of hand. What you're seeing right now is the full titles and lengths of the first 6 entries I got when I typed in KH Union X cutscenes on YouTube. I feel like my point here is self-evident, but just in case, I would have to deal with the variation both in how long people stay on each scene, and in what people consider to be important to the plot. And they're bringing in phrases like most understandable and with explanations. I don't want to tango with that. Basically, it's so far disconnected from the rest of the series that it would confuse more than clarify, and it would really screw up the consistency of my measure. Alright, that's maintenance and upkeep done. Now let's say we actually get on to the point of the video. I've already introduced them, but I'm doing it again because that's the formula. We're looking at the Disney trio: Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. So at first glance of these overviews, 2 things stand out. The first, Donald and Goofy are nearly identical. They are so close that Goofy beating Donald out might just be from me making small errors here or there. Someone else doing this by the same rule set could very possibly switch them around. Second, Donald and Goofy both just clobber Mickey, coming in at over 3 times his total over 18 hours as opposed to just under 5. Now I say those 2 things stand out, but they are by no means surprising. Donald and Goofy were always going to take the 2nd and 3rd slots. That's just how it was going to be. The only real mystery was who was going to get which one. Mickey actually went 1 slot higher than I thought he would. I placed him just under Aqua, but he beats her out by over an hour. So here's how we're going to do this. Pretty much every observation about one would also apply to the other, so we're going to look at Donald and Goofy together first. After that, we're going to switch to Mickey, then we're going to look at all 3 of them, and finally, we're going to talk about why there is no point in trying to compare them to the other trios. Don't worry, I'll get there. For Gugu and Don Don, differences were pretty much always a matter of who shows up first in the shot. You want to know the only 4 canonical points where they aren't together? The first scene Donald gets in Kingdom Hearts 1, Goofy finding Datasaur first in Recoded Hollow Bastion, that one time that Goofy fucking died, and this one random scene in the underworld in Kingdom Hearts 2 where only Sora and Donald are spying on Hades and Auron. The highest times for them are in the beginning, with Kingdom Hearts 1, Chain of Memories, and Kingdom Hearts 2, and then at the very end with Kingdom Hearts 3. Between that, we see them for literally 2 seconds via flashback cameo in Days, a sizable contribution in Recoded, firmly supporting roles in Dream Drop, the requisite cameo in Birth by Sleep, and the ending cameo in 0.2. You would be shocked to know that their bar set looks like a shorter version of Sora's. Switching gears to Mickey, we see something actually much different. Square had an incredible amount of restraint with Mickey pretty much all the way through the series. In Kingdom Hearts 1, you do not see even a second of him until the very end. After that, he takes on a similar pattern to Riku, varying roles that are prone to having scenes sprinkled throughout a given game. Following that fleeting glimpse at the end of 1, he gets a larger showing during Riku's story in Chain of Memories, steps much further out of the shadows during 2, gets a quick check-in for Days, his second highest time in Recoded, a firmly supporting role in Birth by Sleep, multiple supporting roles in Dream Drop, the Aqua team-up in 0.2, and ending off with his largest appearance in 3. When you line them all up, you get a very clearly defined look at where Donald and Goofy leave Mickey in the dust. All 3 characters are introduced in Kingdom Hearts 1, and all 3 are seen at least for a few seconds in every game. But by the end of Game 1, the dog and the duck had an hour-and-a-half head start over the mouse. Then they more than doubled that in Chain of Memories, and more than doubled it again in 2. Mickey does get a larger role from Days to 0.2, but those leads are measured in minutes, not hours. Cap it all off, Mickey doesn't even make it to a quarter of Donald and Goofy's time in Kingdom Hearts 3. It's actually a pretty similar comparison to Riku and Sora. Just like with all the other trios, the times reflect their roles in the narratives, which is to say, very unique. Very, very unique. Unlike literally any of the other trios in a way that we'll talk about later. For right now though, Donald and Goofy introduce a new effect, though it's similar to the player character effect and it's kind of been there the whole time. This is the party member effect. When someone's at least selectable as a party member, you're going to see him more often. While not specifically a trio in the traditional sense, Sora, Donald, and Goofy are easily the most tightly knit trio of them all. You do not get to accompany the main character everywhere for 2/3 of the series, and I mean that literally, without racking up some serious screen time. If you want further proof, you just gotta look at the party members from each of the worlds. You're gonna see a lot more of Jack when you're in Halloween Town, or Jack when you're in Port Royal. To clinch it, here's Riku's screen time in Kingdom Hearts 2 split into before he rejoins the party and after. That 10 minutes is across 10 hours of cutscene. The 38 is across less than 2. Mickey is very rarely a party member, and when he is, it's only for a battle or 2 at a time. Usually, he's always got something pulling him away. Sometimes he's got other stuff to do, sometimes he's got a spotty connection, and sometimes it's kinda contrived but ultimately an offensive plot pinball. I feel like there's also probably a discussion to have about Sora, Donald, and Goofy having a collective point of view, as a party, but that's going to complicate this a lot, so I'm going to ignore it. Offsetting Mickey's lack of appearance in your party is that he is undoubtedly the 100% most active character in the cast. Maybe, possibly, I think. See, with Donald and Goofy, the active versus passive distinction is weird. It's kind of hazy. This tends to come up when you have a distinct binary measure like this. They don't cleanly fall into either one. In a lot of ways, they're active characters by virtue of being with Sora. When they're together, there's never a point where the 3 aren't moving around, accomplishing tasks, generally working toward a goal of some kind. But Donald and Goofy very rarely initiate any of the doing, 99% of the time, and once again, I mean that literally, they're either tagging along with Sora or Mickey, going with the flow. So they could be seen more as reacting to whatever the current leader does, having things happen to them. That would seem to lean more passive. Being frank, no character is purely one or the other. Everybody's got points in the series where they lean to either side. Kairi is definitely active during the end of 2 and 3, and Sora, being unconscious, is definitely passive in Days. The reason this measure still works is that, if you zoom out, you tend to see a definite lean to one or the other. And if need be, you can zoom in and still distinguish which side a character is favoring at a given moment. For my part, I'm still going to call him active, if a bit reluctantly. For one thing, an active character is typically associated with higher screen times, and they have high screen times. But more importantly, There are times in the series where they are way more obviously passive, like when they're being completely useless in Birth by Sleep. Alongside that, I would also assert that Mickey is the more active character, but he's got that working in the background thing that Riku has. Do he, Riku, and Naminé technically constitute a trio? Because they kind of were working that way in Days. You know what? No, not important. Bottom line is, Mickey gets less time than Donald and Goofy for pretty much the same reason that Riku gets less than Sora. None of this shit applies to Recoded, and it only kind of applies to Dream Drop. Kingdom Hearts Recoded, and by extension Kingdom Hearts Coded, is the only game where the focus is specifically on the Disney trio. The core plot is Mickey, Donald, and Goofy trying to figure out what went wrong with Jiminy's first journal after Naminé wiped it. That narrative focus has a lot of ramifications for the characters and their dynamics. While they still share top billing with him, Data Sora isn't nearly as front and center as Sora usually is. In that same vein, the roles that Hot, Diggity, and Dog take on here are also a significant departure from how we normally see them, both in terms of the story and how they interact with Data Sora. For starters, Mickey is a whole lot more present with Data Sora than he ever was with regular Sora. This was the first game where there wasn't something in the plot keeping him from sticking around. Instead, he's a consistent guiding force throughout the whole game and a direct ally in multiple occasions. It's a lot more like how he was with Riku in Chain of Memories, and it results in his highest percentage of any single game as well as his second highest screen time. It goes to show just how much of his character is kind of centered around the aloofness angle. Speaking of central character identities, we also get a good look at how strongly linked Donald and Goofy are to their party member status. Recoded gives us more of their perspective than any of the other games. They get to reminisce, come up with plans, worry about things, and have some of their most vulnerable character moments. So why is there still such a power gap between this and their larger appearances? Well, they're still relegated to observers for the most part, only entering the fray in Hollow Bastion, and they're all but absent from the second major section of the game. Recoded's a fascinating game because the Disney trio are central characters to the story, but in a way that completely diverges from how they normally behave. Mickey is so much more present here that he manages to nearly match his highest single game screen time in a game that's less than half the length. Meanwhile, Donald and Goofy get to have a lot more character development. But because they aren't actively involved like usual, they end up with much lower times. Now, Dream Drop is weird for a whole different reason. On the surface, it goes in a similar direction to Recoded. The Disney trio watches from a hub of some kind as Sora and Riku combats a threat they can't. During that time, they become aware of a B-plot involving Pete and Maleficent, so they go to take care of it. This time, though, it ends with Axel helping them.
My name is Lee.
Shut up, Axel! After that, they get to continue being completely useless while Jensen's incompetence gets Sora level drained for the third time in the series. Whew. Got a bit personal there. Let's keep this professional. The difference here is that up until the B-plot starts, like halfway through the game, they don't talk. Not a peep from any of them until Mickey's like, "How do Pete and Maleficent just keep randomly getting into the castle? Do we not have guards? Okay, let's go kick them out again." It's like 10:30 at night. That is the absolute best Mickey Mouse impression you are ever getting out of me. After that gets solved, they're not really seen much again until the end of the game. Overall, they're fairly passive and not involved with Sora or Riku, so the low times make sense. Except there's another Donald and Goofy to account for, and two other Mickeys. I'm gonna do Symphony of Sorcery first because it's simpler. It is 9.5 minutes of Mickey needing to be saved from a conductive trance. It's the most uninvolved he is in the entire series, and I have torn myself apart trying to figure out how canon it's supposed to be. Okay, quick question. Why did they think the 3DS with its 360p screen was the right system to try and emulate the stunning visuals of Fantasia? Whatever. You want to talk about ambiguous canon? Land of the Musketeers, or France for short, is a fair bit more involved. Now, given Pete's role here, I could make a Big the Cat French Revolution joke, but none of you watched my Sonic video, so whatever. While they very easily fall into the iterations rule that I made in the previous video, I would be remiss to try and say that the Musketeer versions of these characters were the exact same as the Kingdom Hearts versions. Musketeer Mickey's a lot more gung-ho than King Mickey, and Musketeer Donald definitely doesn't have Court Magician Donald's spine. Goofy's pretty much the same because he's perfect the way he is. This is one of the worlds that Sora's coming into like a fanfic insert. Three Musketeers was a movie where Mickey, Donald, and Goofy were the main characters, and they had defined arcs and growth. Donald finds his courage, Mickey learns to stick by his friends and not rush into things, and Goofy doesn't change at all because he's perfect the way he is. As such, it's much more Mickey, Donald, and Goofy's actions that push the story forward. It's by no means the majority of their time in the game, but it's definitely where they're at their most active. Okay, I think we've gone as far as we can in a vacuum. It's time to contextualize. In terms of overall screen time, Disney plants itself pretty firmly in the upper half, knocking Riku from 2nd to 4th place and Aqua from 3rd to 6th. In terms of single game high, Donald and Goofy once again take 2nd and 3rd. Mickey only makes it up to about 9th, just above Axel. They also get to join the barely exclusive More Time Than Kyrie Club, with Donald and Goofy doing it in one game. Moving on. So this is normally the part where I find other trio members to compare them to. Instead, I've got a highly telegraphed curveball. In the last video, we ended up with 3 archetypes. The naive young man, the don't be like me big brother, and girl. Mickey's not naive, Goofy's perfect and everyone should want to be like him, and Donald's not a girl. This opens up a very important question. What's a trio? What narrative construct are we talking about when we say that word? Now, the obvious answer that you all know doesn't work, because it's the one I'm starting with, would be a group of 3 main characters. At first glance, that seems like a perfectly good definition for this. A lot of you might have come to this definition yourself. However, if you did come to this definition, I have a couple questions for you. What about Naminé? In Kingdom Hearts 2, she seems to occupy the 3rd slot for the Nobodies. But once Days came out, Xion way more firmly fit the bill. Actually, speaking of Xion, what do we count as a main character? Because Xion's in less than 3% of the series. Are we differentiating between a main character for a given game and one for the series? Kairi certainly feels like she should count, but the story never actually focuses on her like we would expect it to. I've already referred to Axel as the reigning champ of supporting characters or something like that. Can you be both a supporting and a main character? You see what I'm getting at here? Even if you have your own answers for each of these questions, not everyone is going to share those answers. So the much easier thing to do is to just broaden your definition a bit. What works much better is a group of at least 3 thematically linked major characters that are heavily involved with the central plot. It's not a perfect definition, but welcome to literary analysis. Aside from the archetypes, we can add 3 defining elements that have shown up to all the trios before now. First, each trio member has a separate but interweaving story with the other members. Second, each member has a personal arc to go through. Third, no member of a trio is intentionally made to play second fiddle to another one, to get out ahead of the jokes. Yes, even Kairi. Notice that I've specifically avoided the phrase main characters. That's because it's a loaded term with different definitions and criteria depending on who you ask and what level of specificity we're talking. However, I would say that to some extent every trio member is supposed to be a main character at some point. Except the Disney trio. Hear me out. The Disney trio interacts with the story like no other trio. They have very specific and unique roles that they fill, and as such, don't behave in the same patterns. This isn't easy to explain, believe me, I've rewritten this section enough times to know that, but bear with me and we'll get there. Alongside not fitting the archetypes, the Disney trio doesn't have any of those defining qualities. That's why I included the phrase, up until now. Before the Disney trio, those qualities held true for all of the other ones. Now that they don't, we've got to expand our definition. That's also why I say major characters and not main characters. Instead of each member getting a separate story, this trio gets 2. Kinda. Mickey's side of things, and Donald and Goofy's side of things. As for how they interweave, they don't really. Unlike the rest, these 2 stories are very purely plot-based, not personal arcs. Mickey, Donald, and Goofy don't really go through any meaningful character changes. They learn more things, and they get more powerful, but at the end of the day, they're still Walt Disney legacy characters Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Goofy. Because of that, they don't need to mirror each other like the others do. As such, they don't really interweave either, save for when another more character-driven story is involved, usually Sora. For a large majority of the series, Donald and Goofy don't even see Mickey. Near the end of the other video, I talked about how every character has a point where the story is about them, save for Kairi. My point there was that the story failed to let someone who is, in all respects, supposed to be a main character actually take that role. Mickey, Donald, and Goofy have that same thing happen to them, but here it's more by design. Remember before when I said there were kinda two stories in the trio? Donald and Goofy are sidekicks, pretty explicitly. They operate on their own without Sora or Mickey from when they first leave Disney Castle to when they find Sora in Traverse Town, and then pretty much never again. Their story, for the most part, is Sora's story, and we're tagging along. This isn't always the case, but it's way more often than not. Mickey, while arguably the most active, plot-involved person in the series, works much more as a narrative force than his own character. A lot of his appearances are him entering someone else's story for a brief moment to either save them, give them sage advice, fight alongside them, or any combination of those. Once his work is done, he's gone in a flash, racing, teleporting, or bouncing off to his next scene. At the end of the day, the Disney trio has a much different purpose in the story than all the others, and as a result, it doesn't follow the same rules that they do. Instead of being stories for us to follow, they're more there to follow the stories alongside us. Well, Mickey's more there to turn the page for us as needed, but you get what I mean. Donald and Goofy are around to keep Sora out of trouble, and Mickey's there to help Riku rehabilitate. They're the adults in the room, chaperoning these weird anime kids around, learning and subsequently failing to do the newest dance crazes. And that's the Disney trio. In fact, that's all the trios up through Vanilla Kingdom Hearts 3. I'm legitimately baffled as to how this video managed to be as long as it was, but here we are. What comes next is going to be much shorter. First, I'm going to do the Remind DLC. Whether or not that's going to be its own category, or whether I'm just going to add it to 3, I'm not quite sure yet. Then, I'm off to Melody of Memory. Doing some cursory reconnaissance, I'm not sure if there's enough in either to constitute their own video, but then I nearly managed to take just as long with the Disney trio as I did with all the others, so who knows? I'm going to sabotage myself now by saying that the next video shouldn't take nearly as long to come out as this one did, since a massive portion of this time was collecting times for Donald and Goofy. Either way, the power of waking is still the worst plot device, and may your heart be your vague and widely applicable metaphor. Peace out.